Hi, this is not John Green, and today we're going to be talking about the extent to which nonviolent protests in the United States were effective in the women's suffrage movement. The women's suffrage movement of 1910 is a long and complex story of struggles against a set of androcentric ideals that had been present in the United States since its foundation. It is important to consider the background that led women to rally for the right to vote. In fact, women got the vote 50 years after African American men were emancipated in 1870. That was a factor that influenced this greatly because, in short, women shared the contemporary views on race back then, and many thought that if black men could vote, then why can't they do so too? It is important to consider that the Industrial Revolution was shifting away the focus of pure women from the home and family life towards factories where the conditions were deplorable. Alcoholism was a big public health issue present at the time, and for all of its consequences, the prohibition began after women got the right to vote. Women faced abuse at the hands of their husbands, and because no one likes to be beaten and left to hunger while your husband gambles away the family's money, women were starting to want more political power to change laws. Women in the 19th century weren't actually considered citizens because they couldn't vote or own land under their names or hold a political position. Though that changed slowly, and women were able to vote for their county or state elections, but not in presidential elections. And it is important to note that they were only able to vote in certain states. Before 1910, many pioneering women published articles to gain support to their cause. For example, Alicia Stone Blackwell wrote Why Women Should Vote in 1896, a series of 16 arguments as to why women should hold a vote to government. Stating pretty sensible rationale, like 1. Because it is fair and right that those who must obey the laws should have a voice in making them, and that those who must pay taxes should have a vote as to the size of the tax and the way it shall be spent.
One of the best strategies the suffragettes used included the hunger strikes they led whilst in prison. Although this was met by the government force-feeding them, they managed to take advantage of the situation to raise support. They took advantage of the force feedings by sharing their stories, as it would not only gain sympathy and support from the reader, but also embarrass the government. One example of this included Kitty Marion's account on her force feeding, which was published in the suffragette newspaper. Her story, which was titled Horrible Pain, goes on to say the following. I was violently sick during this feeding, but it was nothing to the time I had in the evening. When the tube was put up my nose, it twisted, and part of it came out my mouth. The pain was so horrible it felt as if my nose was being pulled off, and I struggled violently. Soon after, she writes about what the man who fed her said. After all, it's only an India rubber tube. And she replies, but to me it felt more like a crowbar. I was violently sick, and when the operation was over, I cried with relief and pain. This helped the movement to a large extent as it pushed their message in the form of self-harm, which would have called for immediate action from the government and political groups, embarrassed the government, and was used to gain public sympathy. Another important nonviolent aspect of the suffrage movement is the practice of picketing. Women stood outside of offices and government buildings, often hours at a time, to raise support. One notable suffragist group that picketed is the Silent Sentinels, who picketed outside of the White House. Their signs, which often read, Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty? And Mr. President, what will you do for women's suffrage? Many of these women were often arrested for disrupting the public and were sent to workhouses, where they would come to practice the aforementioned method of hunger strikes.
It is essential to remember that the women's movement faced a strong and sometimes violent opposition. Men and many women didn't want to alter the way of things, mostly members of the plantation class because it wasn't convenient. And as we've learned, they held a lot of power over the government because of their wealth. However, some southern plantation ladies were in favor of the suffrage movement, but they were few and far between. The way the opposition voiced their complaints was through books and cartoons that attacked suffragettes' femininity and their quality as mothers. So, in conclusion, we saw how the picketing, hunger strikes, and force feedings helped contribute to the women's suffrage movement to a large extent in a non-violent way by using strategies that would gain sympathy from the public rather than disdain and fear.
much like the future civil rights movement of the 50s. These hardships were worth enduring, as in the end, American suffragettes managed to obtain their much-wanted right to vote and be considered as political equals through the 19th Amendment. Women's suffrage is still an ongoing issue, with women in places such as Middle Eastern countries, like the United Arab Emirates, Brunei, or Saudi Arabia, lacking many rights, especially politically and socially. Although it seems like they may never obtain this right, because the US is one of the world's superpowers and is considered one of the leaders of the free world. Its support of certain ideals becomes more influential over others. Even then, women, well, maybe everybody, should be proud of how far we have come as a society that considers women as equal citizens.